Right, welcome to the Working Wellbeing's podcast.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you so much for being here.
You're
Live
welcome.
at the Health and Wellbeing at Work conference. I'm going to get that right once.
Yeah, a lot of W's in there. Yeah, a lot of W's.
There really is. So for the benefit of our audience listening, what's your name and what do you do?
Okay, my name is Briner. I'm a professor of organisational psychology at Queen Mary University of London and a visiting lecturer at Birkbeck College, University of London. And also I work 2 days a week with the Corporate Research Forum, that is a small company that aims to improve the effectiveness of HR. So that's me being a bit of a pracademic, as people say, trying to combine my academic interest with the practical interest around
I've
HR.
never heard that before.
Pracademic is awful, isn't it? I don't know why I said it now. I take it back. Yeah.
Yeah. I do. What did I hear the other day? A wellpreneur. Wellpreneur. Is that
Okay. A lot of wellpreneurs around here.
yeah, there must be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hanging around. Yeah. And evidence-based practice. That's your.
Yes, that's
bit,
my
right?
thing. That's my thing. Has been for some time now. Yeah.
Yeah. So could you give us an evidence-based practice 101?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What that
Absolutely.
means?
I can do it. I'll try the 90-second version, and I can make it longer if you like later. So yeah, essentially, evidence-based practice is to help practitioners in whatever field they're in, from well-being at work to health to policing to policy making, do two things. One is to focus on what the most important issues are and challenges for their clients, their customers, employees of the business. So understand that first, and then once that's understood, do the same for saying if there is a problem, what intervention is most likely to work. And that's done through a combination of critical thinking and the best available evidence from multiple sources. So that's the basic idea. And the three main principles are: you take a structured approach. So everyone always uses evidence, but often they don't do it in a very structured way. You focus on the best quality evidence there is. And also you really try to focus as much as you can on doing things that are most likely to be effective.
Yeah. Bang on 90 seconds. I was even timing it.
Oh, really? Okay.
That was quite good. No, absolutely. And we need more of that, right? Because there's a risk, particularly in, well, no, let me phrase that slightly differently. What brought you to a wellbeing conference?
Well,
See everyone
actually,
there.
weirdly, if you're a little personal anecdote, I've been interested in wellbeing at work since I was an undergraduate. So quite many decades ago. And I first got interested in stress at work.
Yeah.
And someone called Hans Selye, who's regarded as like the father or perhaps the godfather of stress and stress at work. And I got interested in how stress at work may or may not be related to illness. And I've been in wellbeing at work in different aspects of that, psychological wellbeing, physical wellbeing, for many years. So I'm here, I think, partly because of that. And I think also because obviously HR is now getting more and more into wellbeing. So I think there's a kind of crossover there between my interest in HR, my interest in work psychology and wellbeing. And I think also HR in general, but also wellbeing at work as well, are areas I think could really do with upping their skills and ability in becoming more evidence-based as practitioners.
So what was the talk on today?
The talk was on really looking at an evidence-based framework I've developed with the Corporate Research Forum. It's based on existing frameworks, taking that framework and trying to apply it to a well-being at work problem. So, for example, if you thought there was an issue in the organisation with low well-being, whatever that means, how would you go about actually investigating what that problem issue was? How would you find out? And once you had found out, what you do about that. So I talked about that, talked about some of those main principles, but also I focused on some of the barriers. And what strikes me always in evidence-based practice in any field at all is that I think people understand it quite easily and they get it. Yeah. But then if you look at what we do when we are working, we don't tend to do very much. So, and that's because there's lots of barriers. So I also discussed some of those barriers to it and how you can maybe overcome some of those.
Have you got an example of some of those barriers?
Sure, there's quite a few. So one really good example, I think, is fads and fashions. Yeah. And without wishing to disrespect any of the exhibitors here today or any of my colleagues, it is quite likely to be the case, just almost by chance, that some of the things being sold or promoted here will probably turn out to be fads, as in there's the latest idea, everybody thinks it's cool, everyone's doing it, so you tend to copy it. And like most of those ideas, turn out in the long run to actually not be terribly kind of helpful. And fads are certainly something that can get in the way of evidence-based practice because they encourage something called solutioneering, where you define a problem by the absence of a solution you've already thought of. So you might say, the problem is we don't have a wellness strategy. Well, that's just not a problem. That's a solution to something. Yeah. Or the problem is we don't do mindfulness training. Or the problem is we don't do financial wellbeing education. None of those things are problems. They're solutions you've already thought of. So it encourages kind of backwards thinking. So fads are very, very pervasive in lots of fields and very powerful in terms of distracting people from taking that evidence-based practice, if you like, path towards doing what's important and what's more likely to work. And there are ways of dealing with fads and sort of spotting fads. One is they are, very heavily promoted by so-called thought leaders and gurus, for example. Another one is they fit in with the current zeitgeist, to the way people think about things at the moment. Another one is they're almost like panacea, like they're going to solve everything for everyone. So we actually have a checklist of 12 red flags for fads that you can kind of go through and say, well, this practice, is it likely to be a fad? And if you are ticking more than maybe 5 or 6 of those red flags, go with caution. It may well turn out to be a fad. So that's one. There's also cognitive biases. There's also incentives. A lot of people are not incentivized to really make a difference. They're incentivized to get things done and to be productive. Does it help the organization? That's a different kind of question. So there's quite a few barriers. And I think for me, if you can't completely remove them, but if you're at least aware of them, you can see them coming a bit and do a little bit to maybe try and deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it really interesting. I'll be totally honest with you. I love the work that you do. I follow you on LinkedIn. I read all the work that you do. I also find some of the things that you write really triggering.
Yes,
But I find it useful. The reason why I've not unfollowed you, because if I found it that triggering, I would just
Sure.
unfollow you and wouldn't listen to it. But the reason because it challenges your thinking, and I think
Yeah.
the trigger comes from the fact that I might be delivering something and you'll say, you'll have a video or an input, and I'll think to myself, oh God, yeah, what I'm delivering isn't evidence based, and it's a waste of time, and that's you get defensive about that.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I like to think I then take that initial defensiveness, and then once I'm over it, I think, well, how do I do a better job of taking a more evidence-based approach? But it's tricky, and I could see why people would just stop at that defensive space and be like, yeah, you're wrong, I'm right.
I think it's because, whatever the stuff is people are delivering or rolling out, as we like to say in HR, they may really enjoy doing it and they may be really, really good at it. That's absolutely correct. Is it making a difference? Is it valuable? Completely different question. And I think often in many fields, not just HR, not just around work and well-being, people are very focused on delivering stuff. They're not so focused on, is it making a difference that's meaningful and important? I think it is triggering because if you devoted a lot of your effort and time to learning how to do something and your clients seem to really like it, to be told, wait a minute, that thing you've been doing for 10 years, it probably isn't very useful. And certainly some of the conversations I've had with people, they will then sort of pivot towards saying, no, it doesn't really do what it's supposed to do, but it has this other value. So a very good example here that we use quite often is things like Myers-Briggs type inventory. It's a personality measure. It is not regarded scientifically as a very good measure of personality. And if you point this out to people, eventually they agree with you who like it. But then they say it's very good for starting a conversation. So you say, why is it good to start a conversation? Oh, because it helps. Does it? How do you know? Maybe it's bad to start a conversation. And even if it is good, why is doing a structured personality test that isn't very accurate, probably, compared to others? Why is that a good way of starting a conversation as opposed to something else? Like, let's play a game of Monopoly. Let's go for a walk.
Yes.
Let's talk about what you ate last night.
Yeah.
So if that is the goal, why not do that? And I think you're right. It is triggering. And I think it's funny you use that word, because what's quite triggering for me is, I suppose, when I come to an event like this and I ask questions like, as I did today, there was probably, 250 people in the room and most are HR practitioners. And I said, how many of you are responsible or in some way for well-being in organizations? And almost everyone put their hand up. And I said, okay, how many of you have a definition of well-being that you use in your organizations? And just one hand shot up.
Wow.
And that's a bit triggering for me, because I think it doesn't feel right, just as it doesn't feel right maybe for you and others, if someone's saying that things you're doing maybe isn't very effective because you're quite invested in it. So I think there's a lot of triggering going on. And I think that's, to your point, not necessarily a bad thing at all, because it does stop and make you think. It certainly makes me think. I asked that kind of question, hard enough to find well-being. It makes me think, well, if I want to take an evidence-based approach, in that sense, there's a long way to go. There's a long way to go, because we can't assume everyone's working with clear definitions and great measures. They're not at that point.
No, absolutely not. No. And I do see that reflective edge in you as well, because I saw a piece that you wrote a number of years ago now, I'm sure, but that was, you know, why are the 5 reasons or 6 reasons why people don't use evidence-based practice? And that was really interesting for me. I don't know if you remember that piece that you wrote. You know, what are the barriers to the music? You spoke about some of them.
Yeah, and I think it is.
Because they think it's an attack.
Exactly.
Against their profession.
And I think if you spoke like in a sense privately to a lot of professionals in a lot of fields, and you actually say, "Come on, that thing you always do in your profession, do you think it works? Is it effective?" I think a lot of them on reflection say, "Well, we've just always done it that way, or that's the latest thing and everyone's doing it, or we don't really know, or it seems to, but actually we've never quite investigated it." So it's kind of embarrassing to sort of deal with those things, because there are, real reasons why people don't do stuff. And I think one of my, I get sometimes quite deep into conversations with various practitioners, including psychologists, HR, other people. And sometimes they say words to the effect of, in the end, "Rob, I agree with you. I like evidence-based practice, but that's just not going to fly in my job. It's not. If I keep asking questions, if I keep saying, is this effective? If I keep asking, why are we doing this? That is going to be career limiting for me in my job. And what I will be rewarded for, as we just discussed before, is rolling things out, making things happen, getting things done. Because that's the easy thing to measure, not is it actually achieving what you want."
Yeah. See, I don't need to worry about this, because I measure my ability purely based on what people put on the facilitator thing that says, is he a good facilitator?
There you go.
So no, that's all.
There you go. Well, it could
whether it impacts their lives.
That's right. That's right. No, I think that's a really good point. I mean, if that's the point, if that is your goal, if I'm not saying this for you, but if your goal is to make people like you, and you do something, you say, "Did you like that?" Then that's it, job done. If your goal is to help people learn or change or develop or do something differently, obviously that's not going to get at that, but it will give you that information.
Absolutely.
It's like evaluation of training and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Another one which perhaps is a barrier to this is that you've mentioned panaceas before, especially when it comes to workplace wellbeing. The relationships between things, we would like to be a lot stronger, right? So I think that we would like to have this idea of an intervention going in and it completely changes somebody's life.
Yeah.
But in reality, almost nothing works like that. You know, I'm sure this is a completely different context, but I'm sure I read a few years back the relationship between smoking and lung cancer, which we just take for granted. That is a significant relationship. Now, that is a significant relationship, and there is a body of evidence that would prove that. But the size of that correlation is much, much smaller than you'd think it would be.
Yeah.
So in your mind, you think anyone who smokes is going to get cancer, and that's not true.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
But we're looking, I think, as human beings, we want to see like 1-to-1 ratios.
Yes.
But
we do, and I think it's also about certainty, and I think that's again one of the really we discussed it in my session this morning. Actually, really sort of damaging thing to evidence-based practice in general. The people want proof, and they want certainty, and they want truth. And of course, evidence is not about any of those things. It's about kind of probabilities, likelihoods, what seems to be going on given this evidence. And if you look for proof and truth, you're never going to find it. It's too high a bar. And also the point is, we're not trying to find proof and truth in evidence-based practice. What we're trying to do is make better informed decisions. They're more likely to get the results we want. So in a sense, if something is 100% sure, completely proven, it just isn't the issue. But I think you're absolutely right. People like and they want that kind of certainty. And in a way, once you kind of drop that, I think it makes people, in my experience, more curious about saying, okay, let's forget about proving something's 100% correct. Let's just think about probabilities. Let's just think about this compared to that. What's actually more likely to work? And people, therefore, if they take that position, they get into the data, get into the evidence, get into critical thinking more than does it work or doesn't it work? And I think, again, not just in work and wellbeing, not just in HR, the world, is full of solutions looking for problems, and solutions that, as you say, rarely work 100% of the time, or even 90 or even 80% of the time. They sometimes work to some extent a bit for some people in some ways. And that's kind of the best you can do. But the more data and evidence you have, the more you'll be able to make that kind of judgment, I think. And that's really, really important distinction.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So where would you like the world of workplace wellbeing to go in the next 5-10 years? I guess apply more evidence-based practice to the... And this is a difficult question to ask with any kind of certainty, but how far along that journey do you feel like we are? Do you
Yeah.
think we're still starting from scratch, or do you feel like
I think not quite from scratch, but almost from scratch. I think it probably depends on the context. I think hopefully our occupational health are involved, who should be a bit more trained in evidence-based practice. You would hope there's a bit more evidence-based practice going on. I think in other areas, including HR, I know there's encroach on work and wellbeing. I'm not sure. I think we're still quite a long way away. I think there are lots of techniques and practices. And what I tried to do for my sessions, I went through the program, I looked at all the presentations, and I tried very crudely to say, okay, which presentations are about wellbeing phenomena, like depression or anxiety or cancer or whatever? Which presentations are about potential causes of those things, like, like poor leadership or bad job design, and which of the presentations are about kind of interventional solutions. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think there's about 25 in the wellbeing phenomena, 25 in the what causes that thing, and about 60 in the intervention section.
yeah.
And of those 60, only 3 seem to be anything to do with how you actually assess or screen or measure wellbeing and mental health at work. So again, it's very impressionistic. What it suggests is there's a lot of focus on intervention, on doing stuff, not much focus on what causes these things, not much focus on what these things are, and not much focus on how you actually assess them. So again, it's very sketchy, but it would suggest to me that at least as represented here, the field of work and wellbeing is not particularly evidence-based yet. And I think it's one of those, and I think there are reasons for that. There's general reasons, there's specific reasons, but the specific reasons I think are that when it comes to wellbeing at work, everyone has an opinion, just about everyone has a view, everyone can give you anecdotes or situations or examples of where somebody, say, was really suffering with anxiety at work or depression, or there was a boss who was horrible that made someone feel awful and affected maybe their mental health quite seriously, whatever. We can all think of those examples. And I think what it does is it drives a need to do something. And it's very much the road to hell is paved with good intentions here. There are good intentions, absolutely, but sometimes those good intentions, in a sense, override or crowd out the analysis of what actually is this problem and what will really make a difference. So I don't, for a moment, question the sort of broad motivations around it, which seems to be very good, but almost you have to stand back from those motivations and say, look, come on, we all want to do good, we all want to help, motherhood and apple pie, sure, but we need to get into the detail of what is actually going on. And it makes it quite hard when we approach it with this sense of we need to do something because people are suffering. It doesn't help in the end, I think.
Yeah. I was going to ask about that. Taking the words out of my mouth with the positive. I feel like the positive intent is a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
definitely. It's a real good motivator for people, and it's a reason why a lot of people work in this sort of field is because of a personal passion or a lived experience.
It is absolutely, and I get, and that's good as a motivation, but you have to get to go way beyond that, and in the end, it can get in the way. And that's why you have the concept of things like evidence-based philanthropy. If you come across that, it's the idea that if you're going to give money to charities who are trying to do good, you should give it to charities who are doing things that actually work and make a difference. So even when it comes to philanthropy and charities, they also should be evidence-based. So just because you're trying to do good does not mean you should ignore the evidence-based stuff. To me, it makes it even more important you should, which actually to me takes it onto ethics. And I think I haven't seen much here about it. And in general, I think there's not enough about that, which is that if you are intervening in or trying to manage or try whatever in any way with people's well-being and mental health, there's a really strong ethical responsibility.
Yeah.
And part of that is to say, is evidence-based practice, of course, I'm going to say, which is to find out, well, what actually is going on for people? What do we really know? Are they clinically depressed? Are they a bit unhappy today? Have they got an anxiety disorder? Are they worried about things at home or because of work? What actually is going on for people? And also, if it is important, once that's understood, you need to do interventions where you're reasonably confident that they are going to be effective and not cause harm. It's basic ethical stuff. And that isn't discussed enough, really. And I think people, again, always looking around some of the suppliers, others, you kind of get the sense that they just, to your point, we're just trying to do good. We don't need to think about ethics. Yeah. Well, I think you need to think about it even more, because what you're trying to change is really about people's well-being and their welfare. So there's extra responsibility to
Yeah.
consider the ethical angle, I think.
I think a lot of people would say that they don't think they could possibly cause harm. Now, I don't agree with
Yes,
that. I don't agree with that. But, we're running mindfulness sessions across this. That can't, maybe that doesn't have the positive impact that we want,
Yep.
but it's not going to hurt anyone. Now, I would
Exactly.
actually argue that
Of course it
potentially
could,
it could.
Yeah.
Potentially.
That's a great point. So any intervention that is active that can do something can also do harm. So it's not either or. If it has the potential to help, it actually absolutely has the potential to harm as well. But you're right, that idea it can't do any harm. And in fact, I talked about that today. This is to do with HR theatre. So it's the idea that you do things to give the impression you're doing good or trying to help, even if you don't know if you are or not. It's just lots and lots of activity.
Yeah.
And I think it does cause harm because it ignores the real causes. So you may be giving someone mindfulness, whereas what's wrong with them? They may have some physical illness that actually needs a completely different kind of treatment. Also, it may ignore things to do with environment or the work conditions people are under. You're focusing on them and their cognitions and their affect and their ability to deal with those things. It may be the wrong place to sort of start. So I think things, as well as actually doing harm, I think doing things that miss the point in another way also do harm because they use up people's resources, they use up time. And the analogy sometimes comes from during COVID and lockdown when people were very keen on wiping surfaces. Do you remember wiping packages that came through the door?
Yeah.
And as we knew relatively early on in the epidemic, that the COVID-19 virus was airborne.
Yeah.
It was nothing to do with surfaces. Yet workplaces were full of these things about, and you can say it doesn't do any harm, but of course it does because it makes people think they've done something to do with the virus instead of masking and ventilation.
Yes.
So it absolutely can cause harm to diseases, even if in themselves they don't appear to be.
I'll tell you what, look, I've got an anecdote about that. I'll try and keep it quick, but where it did do me harm was we took the kids in just after COVID, but still when there were a lot of restrictions and whatnot, we took them to Legoland.
Oh, yeah.
And we, before every single ride, so they'd finish the roller coaster and then all the workers would go around and wipe all the seats.
Wow.
And it's like, number one, it's airborne, it's not on surfaces. And number two, do you think you catch it through your
exactly
through your arms on a seat? Like, what's all this about?
Yeah.
Pure theatre.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But the harm that it created was that I just basically queued for 6 hours that day because everything got held up because of these useless interventions.
That's a really good example. And I think this theatre analogy is really important. So what I often encourage practitioners to do, including me, is to look at their practice and look at their practices, look at what they're doing and look at each one and say, okay, is this theatre? Or do we know reasonably well what the problem is this is going to fix? And do we know that this particular practice is likely to fix it? And if you can't answer those questions, go back and try and answer them. But if you can't answer them, it's very likely to be theatre rather than something that's really making a difference. It's impression management, like the Lego workers.
Yeah, absolutely. In fairness, they didn't look like they wanted to do it either.
No, quite.
They've been mandated to do it, absolutely. And I'm also curious now that where my because I'm doing a talk on the second day where that came in your list of. I don't think it's a solution. No, I don't think I'm talking about a solution.
No.
Those things. Although I don't have all the answers. I definitely
No, of course. Nobody does.
No. Nearly out of time. So is there anything else that you wish I'd asked you about on the podcast today?
I think the only thing I would add to underscore all this is just, and I mentioned it in passing, but is the importance of definitions. And I know that people sometimes think it's a waste of time to define things, but and I'm not one of these people who says, you can't manage, what you can't measure either. But I think if you don't know the meanings of the things you're trying to deal with, I think your chances of effectively identifying them, understanding them, and doing things to change them is pretty low. And I think we just don't. And obviously, well-being, there's umbrella terms, there's lots of things with it. That's fine. But organizations can think about what they mean by well-being and how they would define it. And they can look at the scientific literature, which of these bits do we think is important for us. So I think defining stuff in general, particularly in really fluffy areas like well-being, is incredibly important if you want to make a practical difference.
Yes. Yeah, no, really good thought. And the language matters because people use these terms interchangeably. Well-being, resilience, engagement, psychosocial risk, psychological safety. That's another one. They are all separate things if defined properly, but people use them start
Yeah.
to use them just
Yeah.
interchangeably.
Yeah.
It's like, well, they're not the same thing.
They are not the same.
All the
No.
solutions that you're using won't
Exactly. Yeah.
create all the same outcomes. Yeah.
Yep.
No, yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting one. Amazing. Right. Well, I definitely could have talked to you more about this.
Okay.
But we'll call it there in this micro podcast. Pleasure speaking to you today.
Great to see you again. Thank you for inviting me.
For our listeners, if they want to hear more from you.
Yeah, you can just find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Rob Briner on LinkedIn, so I'm pretty easy to find. So I post there fairly regularly. I hope it doesn't. Well, maybe I do hope it triggers you.
I honestly meant that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I could genuinely block you, because I do
Sure.
feel that defensiveness, but I was like, I need this.
Yeah.
I need this, because if you just got a whole list of people who you just agree
Yeah.
with and they're just backing you up.
And the
then-
point of all my posts is not to tell you what to do.
No,
It's not
no,
to
no.
give you a solution. It's not to tell you what to think. It's actually to promote and stimulate critical thinking. And sometimes one way that happens to be done is if you read something or hear something that contradicts something you strongly believe. That's where you're going, and you can just reject it,
Yeah.
or you can say, "Hold on a minute, that's not what I don't think that. Why do they think that? Or why are they saying that?" And that in turn can stimulate, I hope, and deepens people's understanding of the things they're dealing with.
Yeah. Or it just does what it does to me and pushes me into an existential crisis.
Well, there's that
Bloody
too.
hell.
That too.
Oh, no, none of this is
Yeah.
This is worthwhile. Anyway, sorry. So you said LinkedIn. They can find
LinkedIn
you.
is a fairly easy way of doing it. Yeah.
Perfect. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome.
And
Good to see you again. Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of the event.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you.